why not give it for free, right? But the world works differently. If you want to incentivize a commercial entity to work on something, you need to give them some sort of an exclusivity.
Sounds like to get a profit, it takes a lot of time.
If we would have invented something and just publish it without patenting it, then there was no incentive for any commercial entity to try and take it further towards the market. Now, a patent is given per country. There's no such thing as a worldwide patent. If you're granted a patent in one country, that does not mean that this is valid in another country where you did not file for a patent. Developing a drug or taking an idea and developing into a drug is a very, very laborious process. Then there are the clinical testing phases. This whole process can take easily 10 years, sometimes even more than that. And that's why the development of our medicine is very, very expensive. I didn't invent those technologies. I just took them and brought them closer to the market.
Welcome, Nadav. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
Well, here we are going to talk about the bridges between the research sector, specialized in biochemistry and medicine, that is your specialty, with the market, because you work for Hadasit, that is a company that tries to do that, to transform an idea in a product for the market. So, but why don't you introduce yourself? Who are you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my name is Nadav, and for the majority of my career, my passion, my focus was to try and take ideas from the science, from the bench, from the lab, and bring them closer and closer as possible to the market for the benefit of people to use them. And I think I've been doing this in most of the jobs that I took throughout my career. So at this point, as you just mentioned, I am the VP Business Development at Hadasit. Hadasit is the commercialization arm of Hadassah Medical Center, one of Israel's leading hospitals located in Jerusalem. We have 2 campuses here. And what I do is I try to scout for technologies within the hospital and try to identify them, and capture them from the physicians, from the clinicians, from the scientists before, these people go on, continue to their everyday job and forget about those ideas. And so we try to take those here at Hadasit, protect these ideas through patenting them or filing for patent applications. And then once we have these ideas patented, then we try to find the right way to bring them to the market, be it by establishing new companies or by giving licenses to existing companies to take these technologies, which are basically a very early stage technologies, and mature them and grow them and nurture them and bring them to make them a product and bring them to the market. So it's very exciting because I get to be exposed to so many cool technologies and ideas, scientific ideas, and I get the opportunity to make them products or help to take them to this journey, which at the end of it, there's actually a product that helps people. So this is what I've been doing for the last 3 years, a little more than 3 years. Prior to that, I've done other things. I was a CTO in a startup in the mental health space, very cool one. And then before that, I was an R&D manager in Merck, the German Merck, the life science business of Merck, where I was in charge and led the development of many products for the life science research community, including proteins, enzymes, kits. So also taking ideas, developing them into products, and then bringing them to the markets where people can actually pay money and buy them. So I did that for about 9 years, and my education is in life science. So I did my first, second, and third degrees at the Hebrew University in life science, and my third degree was in cell biology and biochemistry. And I did my postdoctoral studies in the United States in California at a place called Stanford Burnham Prebys Medical Discovery Institute, which is also a place which focuses, or a lot of the science there focuses on translational science, meaning science that aims at at developing a product, a solution, rather than basic science. There's also basic science there, but a lot of the science that I was involved in is translational.
Basic science, it's an abstract, knowledge. So the translator, they transform this abstract concept in practical ideas. That's the concept. Am I right?
Well, basic science aims at understanding the fundamentals of, in my case, biological processes, and really going down into the mechanisms, not necessarily for the sake of developing a solution for a problem. Whereas translational science is a science that is aimed at developing a solution, be it a medicine or a medical device or any sort of solution that takes the knowledge that is established through the basic science, take that and implement that towards the development of a product. So that's the difference between basic science and translational science. And I was always attracted to this translational, from bench to bedside, sometimes people call it. So take the ideas from the lab and develop them into a product.
A practical use in a way.
Yes, exactly.
Tell me, can you tell me an example of an idea you found that you transform it into a product for the market?
Well, there are plenty of those. Just a recent one is a technology that was developed here at Hadassah Medical Center by our head of the clinical virology unit. And what she found out, or the problem that she identified, is that pregnant women, at least in Israel, when a mother becomes pregnant, then she's tested for antibodies for a virus called CMV, cytomegalovirus. And if she's negative, meaning that she doesn't have the antibodies, then there's a risk for the embryo to become infected by this virus CMV, which is a very common virus. And so she's advised, the mother is then advised to perform an amniotic fluid test, because the clinician wants to make sure that wants to test if the embryo is infected with CMV. If the answer is no, great. If the embryo is infected with CMV, then there's a huge dilemma, because there's 20% chance that, or let's say there's 80% chance that nothing bad would happen and the baby would be born perfectly well with no signs of infection. However, in 20% of the cases, the baby, the newborn, may become seriously ill with serious neurological problems, sometimes hearing losses, sometimes very severe brain-related neurological problems. So there's a huge dilemma now, because there's no way to predict how would the baby be born. Would it be asymptomatic or severely symptomatic? And then this Professor Dana Wolf, the head of the clinical virology, she identified through very thorough research biomarkers that are present in the amniotic fluid that can actually predict to a very, very high accuracy of over 98% the severity. So if these biomarkers are elevated, then the chances of the embryo to be severely symptomatic are very, very high. Whereas if those biomarkers are low, then chances are the baby would be born asymptomatic, everything would be good. And so before this test, which she developed, the mother or the parents, couldn't know what to do, because the treatments for such a condition are experimental and very risky. And also there might be, if they would decide to stop the pregnancy, then there this abortion may be an abortion for no reason, because the baby could have been born healthy and perfect. Now there is an evidence-based decision support tool that can support a very difficult decision for the parents, for the clinician, in terms of monitoring this pregnancy further. And this is very, very strong. And the moment I identified this technology from this professor, I immediately got related to that, because I think it's a great story, and I think it solves a huge problem, regardless of the market even. It just solves a very difficult problem. So I took that and I showed it to, I tried to commercialize it through different partners. It's not easy, but we're actually now in advanced discussion with a very good player in this field. And I do hope that this would become available to the public very soon. Nicely enough, we actually applied for a prize for a competition just recently called the Health Initiative, the Leading Health Initiative of the Year for 2025. And this project or this technology received the first place just about 2 weeks ago. Out of about 360 applications, we got the first place. And this is a testimony for the scientific community's understanding of the importance of this assets or this technology. And, this is really my daily routine is really coming across great technologies, great ideas. And because this is a hospital, chances are the technologies that come from the minds of these clinicians are technologies with real unmet need and not, technologies that might be really nice and cool, but with no real application. The technologies here, chances are that they do have a significant unmet need because they come from clinicians that, face these problems every day. They're not just, professors in the academia, but they are actual, physicians, clinicians that face those issues. And this is really the example I just showed you or told you about is one of those. And I see every day, a few of those.
Can you give me an example of a product that is already in the market and the process? And can you explain me the process of doing all the contacts and paperwork in order to, release it to the market? What are the players involved?
Yeah, sure. I can tell you about a product or a therapy it's not yet approved, but it's in advanced clinical trials, not only in Israel, but in the United States. And this is a cell therapy technology. A cell therapy is a technology that involves the use of the patient's own cells. The cells are being manipulated by introducing them some sort of a construct, it's called. And by this manipulation, these cells can actually become a tool, a weapon to attack a tumor. So you take out these immune cells, take out a certain type of immune cells from the patient, you take them out, you manipulate them outside the body, and then you put them back into the patient. And these manipulated cells now can attack the tumor, the cancer, and eliminate it. So this concept, which is called CAR T or cell therapy. CAR T is a type of cell therapy. One of these cell therapies, this CAR T, was developed here at the lab of our head of bone marrow transplant unit. Her name is Professor Polina Stepansky. And all she wanted to do is just to help her patients. Her patients who suffered from multiple myeloma, which is a type of cancer. And she reached out and she contacted another professor in a different university here in Israel, Professor Cyril Cohen from Bar Ilan University. And together they came up with this technology, and she actually started treating her patients with this CAR T that they developed, and it showed very nice result. And she was very hesitant, in fact, to reach out to us to bring it to the market, to commercialize it, because she thought that there is no patent potential in this technology. She was sure that there is no patent there, and all she wanted to do is just to help her patients. And luckily, here at Hadassit, we analyzed this technology. This was done by my predecessor at this position. That was a couple years ago. And the people at Hadassit really identified the patent potential. This technology was patentable. And we put a lot of effort to persuade Professor Stepansky that this is really patentable and that there would be benefit, and the main benefit of patenting this would be that this technology, once patented, can be available at the end of the day, once commercialized, to any patient throughout the world. And this is actually what persuaded her to continue with us, to move forward with the patenting, which was great. So that was part one of this journey. And once we had a patent at hand, we partnered with a leading company in the United States, a NASDAQ-traded company called Emix Biopharma. And this company was intrigued, was very much impressed with this technology, and they decided to negotiate a license from us. So I should say that we never sell our patents. We only give license to use the patent. So we keep the ownership of the patent, but we give a license, an exclusive license for the most part. And so now there's the phase of negotiating the license terms with this partner. In that case, it was Emix Biopharma. And we negotiated, of course, a deal. Again, it was a research and license deal, meaning that they sponsored part of the research here in Israel to continue generating more and more results. And up to now, almost 200 patients were treated with this technology. Much of that was with their financial support, the financial support of Emix. And so the deal typically includes, at the end of the day, once the technology becomes a product, royalties from sales, sometimes development milestone payments and other payments. And they, we negotiated that. And we finalized an agreement. They took this. At this point, the technology is being trialed in a clinical trial in the United States, in leading institutions in the US, leading medical centers, for a disease called amyloidosis, which is an orphan disease, meaning that it doesn't have, at this point, an approved drug. So it received an orphan drug designation by the FDA. And we do hope that this will become a product soon. And, people from almost all over the world will be able to benefit from such a treatment for amyloidosis that was not existing up to today.
The results of the trials until now, do you know if they are, positive and...
Very positive, very positive. Again, here in Israel, nearly 200 patients were treated, very good results. I can tell you about an 83-year-old patient that came all the way from South Africa to get that treatment here in Israel. And this person, I think it's been over a year now since he was treated, and he's fine. He's working out. This is an 83-year-old that was very severely ill with multiple myeloma at this point for that case, and he's really, really happy with this treatment. Look, this disease, multiple myeloma or amyloidosis, these are diseases that cannot be cured, but such a treatment can very, very much relieve the symptoms and do good.
They can improve the condition of life of the patient.
Yeah, for sure. For many years, I heard from the inventor, Professor Stepansky. She said that till 10 or maybe a little more than 10 years ago, the lifespan from diagnostic of that disease to death was less than 5 years, 2-3 years, the life expectancy. Nowadays, with not only our treatment, but with other treatments as well, the life expectancy, the median life expectancy is over 10 years. So it's really great. And we're happy that, we can contribute to this space of multiple myeloma in this case, but other diseases by developing new treatments. And again, she came up with this idea by seeing that there's a need with the medicines existing at that point, not sufficient. And she came up with this treatment. And so there was a clear, even from the business aspect, there's a clear business case here because there's, a growing population of patients for multiple myeloma, and the existing medicines are not good. And we know that this one is needed, and luckily it worked. And so, now it's under trials, as I said, in the United States. And, if all goes well, within a few years, not too many, this would be a medicine available for the public.
Oh, great. Explain me the role of patents in the research and the profit that companies like yours can make, and the difficulty, because I understand the process of getting a patent, it can be complicated and also expensive.
That's right. So first of all, why do we need a patent? What is a patent? So I'm not a patent attorney, but a patent is basically a right to exclude others, or it's an exclusivity right to use an invention. Now, a patent is given per country. There's no such thing as a worldwide patent. So if you want a patent in Argentina or in the United States or in anywhere else, you need to file for a patent application in those territories, in those countries specifically. And if you're protected, if you're granted a patent in one country, that does not mean that this is valid in another country where you did not file for a patent. So this is what a patent is. It gives you exclusivity to commercially exploit the technology. And typically, or always, it's 20 years. so it's limited by time. And in exchange, so-called, you disclose the technology, you explain it, you publish it, so it's not a secret anymore, right? And this is also important because then others can develop improvements, and they build upon your technology, and this is how you advance science, right? Or technological innovation. And so this exclusivity, obviously it has a commercial value, right? And you can trade it, and you can give license to use this asset because it's an asset. Now, what we typically do is once we file for a patent application, in addition to that, we also make sure that we have a know-how, which is some protocols we don't patent them, but they are also part of the licensing package. So when we give this patent to someone, or we give a license to that to a partner, to a business partner, we typically give this patent, we license this patent together with some know-how that's related to this technology. And sometimes actually part of the package also includes a tangible material. If these are cells or other materials, that's not always the case, but sometimes that's also a case. So there's a whole package of licensing this patent. What I can also say about patents is that, as you mentioned, it's a very costly process because you pay fees. You need to write the patent application, and this costs money. It can cost, throughout the life of a typical patent, depending on the number of countries you file it, then the amount of money can reach well over $200,000. So, and sometimes even more than that. So we, as Hadassit, we pay for those. And so we're the owners. In fact, Hadassit is what we call the tech transfer arm of Hadassah Medical Center, because Hadassah Medical Center is a non-for-profit organization like most hospitals, or at least in Israel. And then we are a for-profit organization. We're a subsidiary of Hadassah, but we are a for-profit. And so, yes, we own all the intellectual property, all the patents of the institution of Hadassah, and we pay for that. We maintain those patents and we manage them.
Well, I've heard there is a problem when basic science is patent because it's stop innovation. I mean, there's of course patent. The good use of patent can improve innovation, but in some cases, and this is a critique I've read a lot, it can stop innovation if it is used in the wrong way. Can you explain that problem to me?
Yeah, sure. So patents are obviously, because of their nature of exclusivity and ownership and protection, it's almost contrary to the spirit of science, which is to share, to publish, to let everybody know, right? But the good part about patents, there are, I think, a few of those. One is the fact that you publish your results, because if patents were non-existing, then inventions were kept a secret. Think of the Coca-Cola formula, right? Nobody knows what it is. It's a secret. It's, and it works for over 100 years, and it's very hard to imitate that, right? So if a technology would not have been patented and would have been kept a secret, then it was much more difficult for others to understand how it works and to try to develop improvements and to build upon it. So that's one of the advantages of having a patent. And the other advantage is that it incentivizes commercial partnerships, meaning that, since someone is the owner of a patent, for example, Hadassit, then commercial partners can actually take and exploit it and bring it to the public. Whereas if it was not patented, for example, if we would have invented something and just publish it without patenting it, then there was no incentive for any commercial entity to try and take it further towards the market, which we don't have the capacity to do because everybody could have done it. And so, it's not worth the effort, right? So there is a lot of logic in patenting an asset, right? And I know it's hard to understand. I mean, why not give it for free, right? But, the world works differently. Just, if you want to incentivize a commercial entity to work on something, you need to give them some sort of an exclusivity. And obviously us or the hospital as a non-for-profit, we don't have the means, the financial means, and nor the knowledge to take such technologies and, develop them into a product, because there's a huge journey from an idea and to becoming a drug, a product.
Once you develop the product and it's approved, how do you release it to the market? I mean, let's take the case of this treatment to this disease developed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, generally developing a drug or taking an idea and developing into a drug is a very, very laborious process. It really depends on the drug, but typically what you need to do is you need to first show that it works in some non-human models, animal models, and again, depending on the actual type of drug, these might be rodents like mice or rats, sometimes animal tissue, human tissues that are taken from humans, and you can show that it works in these tissues. And in some cases, you actually need to move to larger animals, such as primates, monkeys, right? Again, really depending on the technology. In order for it just to be approved for testing in humans, this is done. This is called the preclinical phase or preclinical stage. And in order for you to get an approval from the regulatory bodies, such as the FDA or the EMA in Europe, you need to really understand what are their requirements for them to approve the use of these substances or the use of these innovative new drugs in clinical trials. So you really need to have the personnel and the expertise to conduct these preclinical experiments properly to meet the requirements of the regulatory bodies such as the FDA. And once you finish this phase, then there are the clinical testing phases. So a phase 1 study is a study that typically aims at understanding the safety of the treatment, just to make sure that it doesn't do anything bad. And again, I'm just simplifying things here. But oftentimes, for example, sometimes, for example, in cancer treatments, you will treat those new drugs or new therapies. You will give them to cancer patients, like severely ill patients, to see if there is also some efficacy information that can be driven. But sometimes in other diseases, you will just give the medicine to healthy volunteers to see if there's, to understand, to analyze the safety profile of the drug. And also sometimes you will, at this phase 1, you will also sometimes try to understand what would be the optimal dosing, the amount of drug that you will give, or the dosing regimen, how many times you will give the drug to the patient. And if phase 1 is completed successfully, then there's phase 2, which is a efficacy study, which aims at understanding if the drug actually does what you think you want it to do, if it cures, if it does, and you need to really find the right patient population that may be responsive for this drug. And this is being done in a relatively small population. And if this is successful, then there's phase 3, where the population is larger and more diverse. Typically, this involves many hospitals or many medical centers, not just one, to see how broad the treatment works. And only following a successful phase 1 and 2 and 3, then you hopefully get, if the results are good, you would get a marketing approval, and then you can sell the drug. This whole process can take easily 10 years, sometimes even more than that. And that's why the development of a medicine is very, very expensive and very laborious.
It sounds like to get a profit, it takes a lot of time. How can you be profitable if these are the kind of periods required to sell the drug?
Well, first of all, it explains to you why new medicines are so expensive, because in the price of a new medicine, you take into account all the failed medicines that didn't make it to the end, So this is just to kind of give you a perspective about pricing of new medicines, which are very expensive, especially when they are exclusive and there is no other drug out there in the market when the patent is still valid. But how can we make profit? I would say our business model is to try and license or to try and partner with as many commercial partners as possible. We know that the majority of the technologies that we license will fail. Statistically, this is how it works, right? And only very few of them will make it to the market. And what we do to compensate for that is first of all, is quantity. So we try to license a lot, hoping that one or two or three will make it to the market and will generate profits for us. And the other thing is that we, what we do is we try to gain some consideration, some money from development stages that the technology goes through. So for example, if the technology successfully finished phase one, then we want to get some payment from the licensee, from the entity that received the license, because now the asset, the technology, is less risked and more valuable, right? And the same goes true for completing a successful phase two, and the same goes true for phase three, and so on and so forth. So this is our revenue model. This is how we generate the revenues, and this is true for most tech transfer organizations or tech transfer offices.
So it's based on the patents in a way, and then to give license, and they get the license get more, value as long as you keep researching. So, but it depends on a strong capital investment in the beginning, because as you told me, patents are very expensive.
Not only the patents are expensive, but the amount that it takes to develop a drug is very big. So there's a lot of investment that is needed. And we, as the owners of the patent, we need to make sure that we find the right partner that will be able to secure enough funding to raise money, basically to raise funding. But not only that, but they should also be able to have the knowledge or to find the knowledgeable experts to take this technology and develop it into a product. And this is you need to have skilled people to do that, obviously, because it's not an easy task. So for us, for me specifically, one of my biggest challenges is to make sure that we identified the right partner to which we give license for the great assets, and to make sure that they work, that they do their best to take these product or these technologies and develop them into products, both in the aspect of raising funds, raising money, as well as in the actual development of these technologies. And honestly, it's not easy, and we're not always successful, and sometimes they fail. And when the licensee fails, we get the license back. And now we have a technology that failed once, and it's harder for us to relicense it. Sometimes we're not successful even to relicense it. And sometimes, the licensee, the original partner, failed not because the technology was not good, but just because they weren't successful in raising funding, or for reasons that are not related to the technology itself. And it's really sad, because then, a technology that may have a good potential to become a drug, a therapy, will not become a therapy because of these reasons.
What is the role of the Israeli Innovation Authority in the development of new technologies and drugs?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it relates to what I mentioned before about funding. So obviously, especially with the early stage technologies that have a lot of risk because they were not yet tested, raising funds for these is really, really difficult, because obviously the risk is really high. So in Israel, for the last several decades, actually, there is a body called the Israel Innovation Authority, which is a government body that supports funding of different projects, different scientific technologies, only applicable science, by streaming funding to these technologies in different programs and different routes. What's good about the IIA is that all of their funding programs come with a match, meaning that they don't just give money that covers the whole budget. They want to make sure that if they put money, someone else gives some match that does not have to be 50-50. Sometimes it's 80-20, 70-30, and so forth. But somebody else, some other investor, has to also put some money, to infuse some money there. And I think this is a good idea, because, to get money with no such obligation is easy. because there's no risk for the person who restored the entity that received the funding. They have the money, they can develop. But if they also need to raise additional funding, then they need to work and to persuade someone else to give their capital, their funding for that project. And so, there's another party involved now. It's not just government money. And I think this is important. And actually, it filters out the not good projects, because if the project cannot, find external funding, then it will not be funded by the government, and then it can fall.
In a way, the Israeli Innovation Authority works as a connector between the private sector, the public sector, and research sector. I'm correct?
Yeah, you can look at it this way, because yes, there is the research sector, the academia, right? The hospitals, the universities. There's the government that the IIA represents. And then there is, like you said, there's the private sector, which also brings the capital. And this triangle of the researcher or the academia that brings the idea, and then the government and the private sectors, which funds the idea, funds the technology. This triangle, can actually leverage the technology and brings it, I think, closer to the market. And it's also a smart way of using capital, because you don't just give money, without any responsibility. You see, but the government doesn't just give the money without any responsibility. You need to really have someone with skin in the game whose money is their own, so the private sector.
What are the critiques or challenge you perceive in this system from the point of view of working for a company from the private sector, so we can improve for the better and give advice to other countries that want to implement this kind of policies?
I think that if you're asking what are the benefits, I think that the benefit
and challenge. Both.
The challenges, well, challenges are obviously that governments need to invest in very risky projects, because these are very early stage projects, so the risk is huge. Obviously, chances are against the technology, just statistically. Typically most of the technologies fall along the way, right? So the government needs to understand that the funding involves a lot of risk, and it's part of the game. But I think that it also creates lots of jobs, which is good, and it also nurtures an ecosystem of innovation, and a national ecosystem of innovation and of development, which I think is good, because at the end of the day, this is throughout the decades. I think this is what is important for a society, even is in order for it to be successful in terms of innovation, is to have funding in the early stages, something to fuel it in the early stage, to give a jump start in the early stages where, capital is very rare and very hard to obtain. And I should also say that one of the benefits of such a system for the private sector is that, the capital that they put in the project, in the initiative, is leveraged significantly by the government. So they put not the majority of the funding typically, and the money that they put is leveraged by the government complementary funding.
In a way, it is unlikely for private sector to invest in the first stage of technology because of a lot of risk. So you need the government to do, the early stages, because otherwise private sector is unlikely to do it because of the risk you explained.
Yeah, indeed, that the private sector, it's a lot of benefit for them, but it's not always the case. There are some venture capitals and some other bodies that actually focus on investing in early stage technologies. It's not a lot of money, obviously, that they put. You will not get, $50 million, but sometimes, this jumpstart money can give you the first push towards, developing the technology and showing a proof of concept that will help you then secure the second round or the more significant money. So I wouldn't say that, only government supported funding goes to the early stage projects. Yes, the majority probably is. I don't know the statistics, but there are also, private bodies, angels, family offices sometimes, that invest lower amounts of money in early stage projects. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are still a lot. Do you remember which are these all venture capitalists? Because it's interesting to know there are funds investing in that. Do you remember some of them?
What names of VCs that specifically invest in early stage?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a few of those globally, actually. There is Curie Bio, which is quite famous for its early stage investments, and NLC, it's another body based in Europe. So there are not a lot, and the check size is not huge, but they do exist. And it's great that they do exist and I think, it's a matter of philosophy. Obviously, when you go and invest in the early stages of a technology, the risk is higher, but then the gain might be higher because you would get more equity in that, in that venture, in that company. So if it's successful, then your upside would be higher.
Now, a personal question to end this chat. How would you like to be remembered?
In my LinkedIn profile, I think I have a slogan that I came up with a few years ago called transforming great ideas into marketable products, or something like that. And I think this is something that has been my passion for years and years. And, business-wise, that would be nice to be remembered as somebody who was able to just enable and bring technologies, because I didn't invent those technologies. I just took them and brought them closer to the market, maybe even to the market, but at least I brought them closer and closer to the market. So this is something that, I hope that business-wise I would be remembered, but I would say that personally, I hope to be remembered as someone who was really nice to work with.
Well, thank you very much, Nadav, for this wonderful conversation. I hope we can talk again about all this improvement to see what's going on with your latest research.
Thanks. I would be happy to. It was a pleasure.